Hello and welcome to another one of our videos on Kenpo techniques of the Orange Belt syllabus. My name is Andy Seetherton and this video we'll be looking at the technique Repeating Mace. Now the attack on Repeating Mace is a step through lunging push. The emphasis on lunging indicates that our opponent will be using all of his weight behind the push to try to knock us over. One of the essences in this technique is to take advantage of this lunging movement and turn it to our advantage. We'll also take a look at the name, Repeating Mace, and see how that also runs through the technique, not just on the normal repeated mace that most people understand in the technique, but several other places where movements are also repeated. So let's get into the technique Repeating Mace, take a look at it without a partner, then break it down, and then have a look at some variations. The standard attack performed for Repeating Mace is a step-through lunging push. Students should also experiment with an attack that uses the opposite foot and arm. As your opponent attacks, step back in one movement, crossing the line of attack to end in a neutral bow on an approximate 45-degree angle to the line of attack. Avoid utilising a rear crossover followed by a pivot out at this point. Whilst you will end up on the same 45-degree angle, this manoeuvre creates a two-stage movement, slowing down our escape and also places our mass momentarily in an unstable position that could be detrimental to our stability. We now simultaneously deliver an outward parry to our opponent's attacking arm, contacting at or above his elbow. The hand of this parry also hooks over the top of his arm in the form of a waiter check. This aids in limiting our opponent's ability to use this arm in a counterattack. The waiter check receives its name from the shape of the hand. The angle of the hand resembles that of a waiter carrying a tray. Due to our opponent's momentum continuing forward, the waiter check may present an opportunity for our opponent to impale his eyes on our fingers. As we begin to settle into our neutral bow, take advantage of the residual force by employing directional harmony to deliver an inward raking hammer fist to our opponent's kidney. Some different striking options other than a raking hammer fist are an inward single knuckle, which employs pinpoint effect, thereby sharpening the strike and increasing the force to effect value, or a simple inward open hand slap, which will spread the energy over a larger area, thereby flattening or blunting the effect. This is good for practice as it will create a reaction without injury to your training partner. After this initial strike, we rebound our arm off of our own body to deliver an outward back fist to our opponent's leading floating rib. My personal preference is to use a torquing outward hammer fist, but as before, an outward backhand whipping slap may be a choice during practice. Kenpo terminology refers to the fist as a mace. This is due to its structural similarity to the medieval weapon of combat. This technique receives its name from the two strikes to our opponent's body, the first travelling through, after impact, to rebound a repeating second strike, hence the name Repeating Mace. This second impact causes our opponent to bend at the waist and his lead leg to slightly weaken and buckle. Take advantage of this structural weakness to deliver a downward looping roundhouse kick following the contour of the lead leg's thigh. The downward looping roundhouse kick impacts at the rear of the knee. This causes our opponent to kneel on his lead leg. Ensure your body weight moves harmoniously with this kick, landing with your opponent's knee on the floor. If you are not using the extension, cover out directly from this position. Do not be tempted to retract your kicking leg after grounding your opponent. At this point you have already passed the point of overturn and will be exposing your centre line to a potential counterattack. By covering out directly, you protect your centre line and control the distance between you and your opponent. We will now move on to the extension to repeating mace. If you do not need this at your point in training, you may wish to skip the next part of this video. As we exit via our cover out, we observe that our opponent is still a threat and we feel the need to re-engage with him. Immediately repeat your cover out, utilising reverse motion, and execute a front crossover towards your opponent as you simultaneously deliver an outward downward hammer fist to his sternum or face. From the front crossover, in place pivot out into a neutral bow to deliver a straight vertical heel palm to his face. Continue pivoting to facilitate a spinning back kick to our opponent's sternum, knocking him to the floor face up. You may find your opponent's legs rise up as a result of his momentum. This will not alter the subsequent strikes. If needed, drag step towards your opponent to deliver an outward back of heel scooping kick to the inside of his knee. Immediately repeat this action by using reverse motion and deliver a roundhouse kick with the same lead leg impacting the inside of your opponent's other knee. Plant your lead leg between your opponent's legs and execute a rear crossover stomp to his groin. From this position, step out of the rear crossover and immediately front crossover out, sweeping down your opponent's shin as you go. Hello and welcome back. So now, before we proceed on to our variations, I'd just like to take this opportunity to remind you that if you haven't done so already, please think about subscribing to our channel and don't forget to hit that like button as well. So, variation number 1. In this variation, we get through the technique to the point where we're doing the downward looping roundhouse kick to the back of our opponent's knee. The force of the kick causes our opponent to kneel to the floor, and at that point we start the cover out. But our opponent counters by attempting to grab our lead leg with his hand. Here we utilise a grafting movement of a crescent kick grafted to a front crossover. This allows us to cross our opponent's body, and then we utilise a close kneel grafted to the same front crossover as we land. This allows us to escape from his grip. We then move to the rear of our opponent and finish out with the extension of circling destruction. So now let's take a look at variation number 2. Here our opponent is far more aware of what's going on than we think he is. We're able to initiate the first mace to his kidney, but as we go to execute the returning mace to his floating rib, he moves his body out of the way. He then counterattacks with a roundhouse punch, and we counter this counterattack by executing 5 swords. So let's get on to variation number 3. Here we're able to get as far as the downward looping roundhouse kick to the rear of our opponent's leg, which causes him to kneel. But in doing so, his action closes off our line of entry to the front of his body. So here we utilise a technique which is sometimes mixed up with repeating mace, and that technique is reversing mace. We do the reversing mace extension to the rear of our opponent's body. And now to variation number 4. Here, once again, our opponent is aware of what's going on, more so than we expect. And as we go to do the downward looping roundhouse kick, he simply moves his leg out of the way. This creates a situation for us where our roundhouse kick now becomes more of a step through and we have our back to our opponent. Our opponent now counter-attacks with a grab to our rear, and we counter this counter-attack on the outside of his body with circling wing. And now for variation number 5. In this one, we're in the same situation as we were in variation number 4, with our opponent far more aware of what's going on around him than we expect. And once again, as we go to do the downward looping roundhouse kick, he moves his leg out of the way. Our kick again becomes a step through, causing us to turn our back on our opponent. This gives him the opportunity to counter grab again, but this time he counter grabs using his other hand. And we execute the technique obscure sword as our variation. So now let's get on to our final variation. But before we do, I just want to say I've had some comments on our videos from people who I suspect are not Kenpo orientated. And they're a little bit unsure why we would expect somebody to just stand there and take maybe 8 or 9 technique strikes before reacting or moving. And I think it's because they don't understand the concept of Kenpo techniques. Our techniques are not set to say this is what you will do in the street. The chances of you actually doing a Kenpo technique in the street are very, very rare, especially in completion. But it's a way of practicing our basics in motion. Rather than do basics split into sections like 100 punches or 50 kicks, one after another, we place our basics into techniques. This allows us to practice concepts and principles, as well as finding out the best way to apply our technique on a human body. This does obviously mean sometimes you've got to make slight contact with the body, but that also helps you learn how people are going to react. So no, we don't expect people to stand there and take 8, 9, 10 blows and then fall down. Hopefully, if we do our techniques correctly, they shouldn't be stood after the first or second blow. But if they are, then like any good general who would have troops in reserve in a battle, we also have reserves that we can bring forward and use if we need them. So in this final variation, we're staying with the person who's attacking us knows what's going on, moves his leg out of the way, but as I step through with the kick, I just simply convert it to a back kick to our opponent's sternum and then cover out from there. So that's the end of another video, and once again I hope you find it of use. Don't forget, if you do find it of use or you've got any points you want to bring up, put them in the comments under the video and we'll try to get back to you. And again, don't forget, like the video, share the video, and don't forget to subscribe. This is Andy Seaton of Combat Fusion Martial Arts saying good night.